Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to afternoon sessions. The third day, but still some people have attention to pay. Thank you. My paper is about an earthquake situation in northeastern part of Turkey. We have had a deadly earthquake last year on 6th of February. We have lost more than 50,000 people. One city is affected very badly. Still, serious issues are going on. It's called in Hatay region, and the city is called Antakya. Ancient name is Antioch. Real Antioch is there in between Syria and Turkey here. I'm going to talk about age effects. I'm from seismology background. I have worked on the fields about 14 years, and then I became sort of sustainability specialist in agroecology. So I'm combining these two experiences together. The city is on the border. How it's affected by it's ignored by the government long time. Um, how the activists and NGO organizations can be helpful or be prepared for this sort of situation in future. Because coming from seismology background, my heart is still affected. Um, the Hatay region, Antakya, is very unique culturally, ethnically, um, in many ways, very diverse area. Okay, the title is about age effect. Age effect, I will touch. I'm trying to shorten my paper. Um, yes, 6th of February in 2023, a deadly earthquake occurred, magnitude 7.8, and many people was under the rubble days and days, weeks and weeks. Government agencies, authorities couldn't reach to this region, particularly the other parts, Marash, other cities have been reached in the third day, but this area was difficult to be reached. Um, so many people had to leave their loving ones under the rubbles, had to leave another cities or even to abroad with pain. Now private companies, government companies are trying to get a benefit out of people's pain and privatizing um, olive orchards and announcing reservation area. We are allocating, I mean, dislocating people to the ancient olive orchard area. So even some people are still living in the tents, in greenhouses, for example. They are poisoned by coal burning in winter time. So why ignorance of Antakya by the officials? Yes, damage was big and underground structure was collapsed, but why Antakya is ignored by the government since the beginning compared to the other affected areas? Although after a year, Antakya was still in a mess. Even the sanitation is still an issue. We know that a healthy society operates like a living being with its organisms and institutions. Since Anatolia, Asia Minor is called, is susceptible to the earthquakes, we are supposed to be prepared for this sort of deadly earthquakes. But in last 20 years, government of Turkey is quite centralized. Even the local municipalities couldn't make their own decision, couldn't act. A Deutsche Welle report says after a month of the earthquake, medical doctor says, we found that some of the corpses that came to us had not yet formed a dead solidity. They had just died. Some of the bodies had no scars at all. We think they died under the rubble, either from a heart attack or from starvation or dehydration. Negligence in Hatay region. There were some serious negligence, especially providing temporary shelters right after the earthquake. Even 1 year, I have mentioned beginning of my speech, hundreds of earthquake victims, the quote into quotation mark, another report says, hundreds of earthquake victims had to live in greenhouses in wintertime. They had to use burnt coal for heating. Tens of them got poisoned and just died. Why Antakya is ignored so much? Yeah, I'm keep repeating this one. Because Antakya is quite diverse ethnically, religiously. Of course, every group have their own opinion, but there was a unity before the earthquake. Not this much dispersed there. If we go back to history, Hatay region was on the Silk Road. Some people say King Road. I prefer to say Silk Road, on the Silk Road route. And Antakya became a central location for the West Rome long years. Ruby Asa, an architect, underlines Antakya itself is also important for Abrahamic religions. The city is perhaps the second only city in the world after Jerusalem. In terms of common life, in the context of heavenly religion, in addition to St. Peter's Church, which is considered the first cave church in the world. It's still in Antakya. Many visitors are coming from abroad. Yeah, the age effect I'm trying to explain here. The age effect is an ecological term. Let's say Antakya is in here. This is Syria. This is Turkey. Antakya is getting influenced from both sides. For example, during Syrian war, lots of refugees came to Antakya first. Even how many hundreds of refugees they can handle, they have accepted because the language similarities, cultural similarities, the other threats. I have visited at that time when refugees were flowing to Antakya. Compared to the other side of Turkey, they were quite tolerant to the refugees. They were trying to find the solutions. So, in terms of ecological characteristic, Antakya carries both sides ecological and cultural values. There are lots of different people from different backgrounds, for example, Kurds, Assyrian, Armenians, Arabs live in this region. So my presentation is a bit long. I'm trying to cut. Which part I should share? I would like to touch otherness since the ethnically diverse, culturally diverse as well. Being other in a disaster situation brings many more difficulties. For example, women from Syria, they have lost their husbands, brothers, they had to live with their children, 5 children, 6 children. Government ignored to provide aid to women. Lots of women suffered to get the aid days and days. So, since we We have a quite centralized government. Also, being from other religion, other nationalities, of course, um, otherness is step by step. Um, Approaching to the government agencies or getting benefit out of the aids or mingling with other people, it gets harder and harder. So, as activists or NGO organizations, we need to pay special attention to the otherness. Antakya, people from all over Turkey, especially women's group, they call themselves Purple Solidarity Group. They have done really serious, continuous solidarity they have shown. They have provided tons sanitary materials, women's needs for sanitations. In patriarchal society, women's needs and children's needs ignored more and more. So feminist organizations are still concentrating on women's needs, which was really successful first time in Turkey. This much obvious appearance of women's needs in disaster zones. Um, and Antakya people from activist background, they have formed a platform, online platform. It's called Nehna, means beautiful eyes in Arabic. Lots of Arabic people live there as well. So through this platform Nehna, still you can do financial aid, or for example, you can approach whether I can help in some ways. Lots of foreign NGOs are coming to do case studies in the area as well. So relocation is, of course, still in discuss. The government hasn't resolved the issue where to allocate, where to dislocate people after a year, still an issue. Government is showing some reservation areas. First time it's happening in Turkey. We never heard of reservation before. Yesterday's presentation have shown that what the reservation means. I have lived in the United States. I know what reservation means. Uh, you can control people in a better way, putting in the same area. So now the struggle became olive tree protection struggle, vigilant. People are, especially women, are taking turns to be vigilant to protect their olive trees because their main income is olive products. And the second big issue, reservation area. It's most people don't understand what the reservation means in Turkey. So hopefully, yeah, we will continue to show our solidarity to people because it's long living pain in Turkey. Antakya, don't forget. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Maybe later. Lady,
Yes.
you cannot.
I have this question because, well, we're part of mutual aid. There is looks precisely our moments of stress and, like catastrophes. And we can see how, for example, during the pandemic, in many places, there were strong networks of mutual aid. And also, I don't know, Sandy, Storm Sandy in New York reactivated Occupy New York as Occupy Sandy, and those are so. What is your experience? I mean, like, would you say that in this case of neglect of the state and withdrawal of the state, have you seen like more networks and projects dealing with solidarity, or the situation was so bad that even that solidarity was not even possible because people were too, yeah, uh, busy with plain surviving. But was
Solidarity is still alive, but of course, divide and rule politics, divide and sell. For example, selling the land or convincing people to move to the reserved areas. Some people are accepting because they are getting tired. Some of them have started to repair their homes, spending some money, borrowing some money from the sisters, brothers, and now they got tired after a year. They divide and rule politics works. The solidarity is not so strong like at the beginning, but activists are getting experienced. But how can we work? Of course, freedom of speech is big issue in Turkey as well. Lots of women's organizations under danger because of this. So solidarity is big at the moment, but analyzing the real issue is much clear. But complexity is there always. Anatolia is not very complex, but Antakya is more complex.
Okay. Yes. Was there did somebody else raise their hand here? No. Okay, please.
I'm familiar with the edge zone principle from permaculture.
Mhm.
That's where like more things become possible.
Mhm.
And I'm just wondering, I didn't completely see the through line with what you shared. Like, what is it that's become possible here, or are you coming at it from a different angle
Possible what?
in this area? Because you said it's the edge zone.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering,
Age effect.
yeah, the edge effect.
Mhm.
What has been the outcome of the edge effect?
Age effect means, yeah, it's a good mentioning because I had to cut my presentation a lot. One of the good part of the complexity, people are bonded each other from the roots. For example, there were a couple of slides I was going to show. When they had to leave the city or the town, they have written on the rubbles, Antakya, you are only our home, we will come back. I never seen this much touchy word in the earthquake zones before. Our only home is Antakya, we will come back. This was so touchy for us because people are bonded each other long years before. They took care of each other's through each other's pain and joy. So neighborhood ties is very strong. So it's still there. Yeah, you can see in food, in the culture, in honesty, and you can see in many different ways age effect. Not only ecologically diverse, ecological diversity is very rich as well.
Thank you, Emet.
Mhm.
The next speaker is Orestes Kolokouris, and I request that he introduce himself, if he wishes, and the title of his paper.
So somewhere here is the paper, but when it, I mean, there is a code. No.
see a paper?
Eh?
You see a paper?
Sorry?
There is a bus.
Password.
Oh, there's a bit of paper next to the laptop.
Ah, okay. That's fair. Okay, where is mine now? Sorry. So in okay. Sorry for a moment, but it wasn't ready. So, and I don't know what is this thing.
Yeah, you don't have office.
Okay, I understand. I didn't have, but when I had to write my PhD, it was always going like that. I abandoned open office. Yeah.
But you have in PDF.
Oh,
It's
okay,
the
okay,
same,
okay.
so this is good.
So, full screen? Full screen? Lost it?
It's maybe the best you can have.
Okay, very nice. Sorry for that. So, hello. So I'm. Yeah, very nice. Thank you very much. So, hello. My name is Orestes Kolokouris, and in this presentation about participative protection of commons, methods and limits, I will try to share with you some thoughts that came also from my PhD thesis that I defended last year about governance of environment and land and local governance, and the question of commons, like an alternative to conventional methods of governing and protecting environment. First of all, uh, some very simple things. We had already a presentation about commoning and common management. I will just want to say that okay, the commons is it's now getting into political discourses and tackling challenges like climate change, food security, and transition of knowledge. And the fact in Greece, it's more center. It's not. It's only limited entered in the debate in a limited way in alternative cycles and backgrounds. And sometimes, most of the cases, it is associated with the concept of public goods in a manner that it ends up being simply a new narrative against privatization of state-owned utility companies. This is a common misconception in political discourses, as commons is not a commodity, but a practice of collective management. Um, Commons is not, it's a practice. Common goods are simply what the word means, commons among us, anyone living in the earth. And it has to do with the limits between personal space and common space. What I'm saying that also because in local movements and environmental movements, we have a lot the question of land use conflicts and the land use conflicts and the commons conflict. Sometimes I perceive we forget that they are conflicts that they exist and they will exist in any form of organization of society. Commons are they beyond private and public? Well, they are overcoming the dichotomy of public versus private that refers to ownership while neglects the belonging, the management, and the access. So they overcome the ideology of ownership of space and the environment. But from the other hand, as we have neoliberal market economy, it still has a sense because public supervision and regulation is the minimum defense in the excesses of globalized capitalism. Nevertheless, only the commons management can overcome the contradictions of modern productivism. So, Common is a participative governance approach. Commons is a collective cognitive approach on how we manage good. And by introducing commons, we simultaneously introduce the following: participative management and just access to resources. That is basic things. Collective management, sustainability of resources, and the bearing capacity of a given source. Now, that means that a governance of commons as a concept is, we could say, an alternative, a different a way of seeing the contradictory term of sustainable development. While the sustainable development speaks about three concepts combining, which they perceived as neutral, but they are not: environment, social, and economy. Where environment is outside the social and against the environment, and the economic is against everything. Here we introduce inclusive concepts that they describe processes, which is any kind of grassroots, more or less, decision making, a sustainable and collaborative, not antagonistic economy. So we will not redefine the commons, but we will just say that in local, urban, and regional governance, policies of policies of everyday life are determined. There are already some innovative experiences of governing the commons. Uh, so, so, I will say some good practices, not best practices, good practices, because we are living in conditions that there are strong contradictions. We have Barcelona, for example, which is a place with a real estate paradise with investments and touristification and urban sections. But from the other hand, and this is a continuous process, we have the institutionalization of some processes like the UBAC Barcelona presents the Citizens Assets program, or the obligation of commons impact studies. Then we have the example of Grenoble, the Charter of Citizens, or some Italian cities and the cooperation pacts. All of these, they follow the principles of expanding the idea of participative democracy by defining the commons and institutionalizing a participative management through agreement between civil society and public services. I'm giving those examples because when we want to pass from environmental protections to participative governance on commons, we have some difficult questions to tackle, like which institutions, where local stops and global starts, the participation, where the participation stops and regulation starts, and the differences of management between every different type of commons. So, as I would like to describe some limits of that. I mean, the questions of tragedy of commons in the Greek case. And the Greek case is a typical example of a society where the logic of governance of commons is foreign to the state, as well as the bulk of individuals and collective actors. This fact leads to destructive results in public policies as well as daily practices. I wanted to describe the forest as a sectional policy, but I will go a bit general. And many have heard about the drought of this summer, and as to illustrate that, we see a private exploitation, small scale exploitation of olive trees in southern of Greece, well irrigated by water resources. And then you have next to Acropolis, that was in September, how the olive trees are destroyed. So there are many examples of these phases of tragedy of commons. I will stick to that. Well, the Greek society, since the post-war gradual dissolution of traditional rural communities and traditional sustainable practices, and since the rapid unplanned urbanization, is facing a constant depreciation and destruction of commons, aggravated by the following: the complete absence of urban and land planning tradition, the unplanned model of development, and all of this stuff is very clear in every aspect of life. I would like just to add a question that it came by the study of environmental conflicts in Attica region and in Greece by by extent. If we take the thesis of Alain Touraine, that it is the conflict that constitutes and organizes the actor, in the sense that the conflict constitutes the collective actor aware of what is at stake in the conflict. Uh, uh, in normal situations, not within in science, in chemistry, in normal conditions, if we have a diffuse and diversified conflicts and local actors, we will have a debate that it will be more or less the medium of the debate that exists is about sustainability, etc. If we have some distortions, some for reasonable reasons, for example, because the local conflicts are linked to the phenomenon of NIMBY in any case. If we have an monoculture, an over-representation of certain types of conflicts, we could have distortions that they produce narratives specifically for that question, and actors that they will not seek to emancipate and empower the people, because this is the question, but reproduce reflections of the society, reactions of the society. I am giving you the mark about the oppositions against wind power plants, and when we are in that situation, we may have anthropocentric reflexive narratives instead of holistic policies that we can measure. And to end that, because I put a lot, I have to mention that such analyses are based on an illusion that in modern capitalist productivist societies there is a status quo that is slowly being overturned. There are narratives that they perceive all the policies about green transition, that it is made in a neoliberal way, as an attack to a certain way of life. But there is not a status quo now. Even the inertia of special policies is constantly creating change. Even worse, inaction in implementing special policies in conditions of environmental degradation reinforces inequalities. And to finish, I'll just resume again the André Gorz 1973 last phrase. If we want to break the ideology of limitless growth, we should promote the opposite. Only what is worthwhile, is good for all. Only that which does not grant privileges to anybody and does not dismiss no one, then it will become possible to be happy with less wealth, and that is because a society without privileges, there are no poor. Thank you.
Questions?
Of course, when you refer to commons, because in Greece, commons is not something you use because everything is like private property in a way, except of okay, specific areas where okay, we can call them commons. So you talk about which exactly areas that could be used for common cultivation, for people of the local. Because, for example, in England, they got the allotments. The allotments are areas where they're given to the people of the town, the area, that they can cultivate on their own and take the produce, and keep it. And it's usually there is a feeling of community, and it's quite a nice thing, actually. I don't understand how that can be applied in Greece, the way it is, where everything, even mountains, all are owned by somebody.
I'd like to cut you there so we can get the question because we only have 4 minutes.
Yeah.
And just there is not a Greek or Spanish or American answer to what is commons, because when we have some basic things that we have to share, and we have to have a regulate the access and the use and the reproduction, that is the common. So even if there is not, because there is not the mentality of commons in Greece, there are commons that we have to share. And that was, if I had more time, because the second section, that is the tragedy of commons in Greece.
Yes.
Are you familiar with the work of Elinor Ostrom? Because she disproved the tragedy of the commons and got a Nobel Prize for her work. And the tragedy of the commons only applies when people are not in community relationship with whatever they are engaging with. And what you're talking about is individuals relating to it and not a community. So I'm curious, the state is separate from that.
That's what I was saying. Actually, tragedy of the commons is the classical economics, and we know that. But we just describe the conditions to come to the conclusions. When we have a society that it has privatization of most of the commons and it has antagonism, etc., we may have a tragedy of the commons. And we have to surpass it exactly with this method, with the participative protection of the collectively. Exactly that. I use the tragedy not because I'm a disciple of the classical economics, but because there is a real tragedy in how we manage the commons.
Have time for one more brief question. No? Okay, we can pick up then on this discussion after the conference with Orestes if we so choose. Thank you. Our next speaker is Ewan Jenkins.
Can I plug this in? Can I plug this in? Can I plug in the laptop?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Perfect. Sorry about that. Cheers.
Let's anyone take
Okay. Hello? 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 Okay. Okay, hello comrades. It's a pleasure to be here from Scotland. First time in Athens. I've had the great pleasure of discussing some of these ideas I'm going to present with people already today. And what it is more of a theoretical sketch. I'm in the first year of my PhD in Scotland. I study geography. I have a philosophy background. That's probably going to be reflected in some of this content. So I don't propose any solutions, unfortunately, but I hopefully sketch out a bit of a theoretical problem, which I see as a running thread through many of the presentations and talks that we've heard today. And that is this idea of composition. And by the end, I want to be able to talk about a movement that's inspired me a lot and hopefully can provide inspiration for our movements too. It's the Soulèvements de la Terre. In France, they translated as the uprising of the earth. And what is composition? Composition, and we've heard the word today in Anna's talk as well about composing the movement, composing a group. So composition is articulated as both a problem and a strategy. So the problem is the idea of a lack of social unity in our movements, the absence of a collective subject, or the breakdown of a so-called hegemonic identity, which is universal enough to unite international movements and challenge a globalized capitalism. And I care about this topic, and I think it's important to say why I care about what I'm doing, is based on the experience of me and my friends about this frustration we have about the tendency of groups to dissolve and fall apart after a certain enthusiasm has run dry, or we've lost steam or freshness or interest. And so this drew me to this idea of composition about how do we unite, how do we stay collective, how do we keep this unity together. And unity is important to say it's a shared horizon, a shared end, rather than a strategic coexistence. And we need to ask this question to see if strategic coexistence is the limit of our struggles or whether we can form a real unity. So I come at this problem from quite a Marxist point of view, so I apologize in advance, but the most basic formulation is articulated in this way. So we have moved on from the historical moment where the proletariat was a hegemonic identity within which we could understand ourselves and through which we could organize. And in Marx's formulation, just to remind ourselves, the proletarian was a structural product. It was a necessary consequence of property relations and the wage relation. It's not what's commonly understood as the working class today, which has taken on more of a cultural or aesthetic signifier. It's associated with brands, dialects, appearance, Dickies, Carhartt. That is not the working class, not what we're talking about. Or the proletariat seems frozen today within a social imaginary of the male white industrial worker, which has taken on nostalgic connotations for those unwilling to let go of this particular imaginary of class, which serves as the foundation for all other struggles. So, in Marx's formulation, again, in dialectical language, the proletariat was already a unity in itself, which only has to become for itself in the course of realizing its historical situation. Because it was the economic relations which structured their oppression, the end was clear: seize the means of production and abolish the property relation. So in Marx's neat formula, the socialist movement was already pre-composed. Identity was just a matter of recognition, of I need to recognize my historical situation. The problem is that this is no longer the case. We have to instead look at the decomposition of the proletariat, which is typically talked about somewhere in the 50s or 60s, certainly after the events of May 68, where the near revolution did not look anything like a proletarian struggle. There were students, women, peasants, unions, often calling wildcat strikes and other general strikes against the wishes of the communist vanguard parties of the time. And Deleuze-Guattari, spoke about the post-68 period and the restructuring of capitalism into the globalized neoliberal form we know it today as a so-called proliferation of margins, or the age of minority struggles. And that's what we're depicting in this graph here. And in a conversation with Negri, Deleuze said, how any group will turn out, how it will fall back into history, presents a constant concern. There's no longer any image of proletarians around which it's just a matter of becoming conscious. This articulates the problem well. Endnotes, the Marxist authorial collective, expresses it in this way: there is no section of the class today that can present its interests as bearing a universal significance. We should note that there is a logic of center and periphery at play in this kind of model, and I want to point that out. And there's usually the image of the communists coming along, often with a party, reminding the minority struggle in question that it's part of a wider class struggle and they should kindly be assimilated into the broader socialist struggle. And so assimilation is not what we're looking for when we're talking about composition. So composition is different from assimilation. So I'm going to brush over an extremely complicated history, but in 1993, Agamben in the Coming community was looking at Tiananmen Square, and he talked about it in quite an interesting way. He said that beyond the broad demands for freedom and democracy, the real object of the movement was to compose itself. And he took 4 notes, which are quite relevant to us. He said that of Tiananmen, this was a gathered community which tried to affirm itself on the basis of pure belonging, of just being there, sharing space, rather than an appeal to any identity property. There were no conditions of belonging. There was no coalitional politics between pre-existing identities. In Agamben's idea, a new community was just born ex nihilo, out of nothing. This new community does not seek recognition by the state, but poses an alternative to it. It presents itself as real democracy. And the task of such a community is to encourage everyone else to desert their posts and to join the community in question. EndNotes migrated some of this analysis to that of the movement of the squares and Occupy, which we've heard quite a lot about today. And it's a bit of a dubious connection, in my opinion, but we're looking at the gathered community, the form of the community itself that gathered together. And it's enough for our purposes to point out that composition was present here in these squares in the attempt to articulate a new unity as the 99% or the indignant. Composition takes on a populist dimension here. It does not organize along class lines. It tries to get beyond identitarian and ideological difference, to posit a new collective, to gather enough forces of multitude to oppose the unity of capital and the state. There was a prefigurative urge to present the new gathered community as already unified, just through sheer belonging, and as already beyond the determinations of the capitalist society they were against, which often meant, in EndNotes' perspective, that the internal divisions were either disavowed or seen as a threat to the movement. But because people were gathered so long, people were forced to look inward, and the reproduction of the camp became the object of deliberation. And in being forced to live together and recognize others beyond your normal affinities, and in these spaces we're talking about dropout youths confronting unemployed graduates, middle classes meeting with the homeless and the unemployed, or migrants meet academics, and without any capacity to alter the class relation by which our encounter is mediated, this articulates the problem of composition. So unity, in EndNotes again, cannot be built out of assemblies alone, or out of consensus decision-making or communal kitchens. To move on, Farrell articulates the problem quite well. Political formulations based on a mass identity are no longer possible. From here on out, all truths are situational. This takes me to the French case, which is the object of my study. Many of you will be familiar with the ZAD. It was a decade-long rural occupation from 2008 to 2018, organized to oppose the airport development in Notre-Dame-de-Lons. It was originally organized as a local protest by farmers and peasants. The squatters joined in 2009, and the ZAD afterward attracted an eclectic mix of people, from environmentalists, anarchists, punks, scientists, migrants, the unemployed, and so on. They managed to build a small village of DIY infrastructure. They learned how to run a reproductive commons. They ran assemblies and round tables. They had a pirate radio show. It's a really cool time. But they used composition as an explicit strategy. So it was described by the Mauvaise Troupe, the authorial collective of the ZAD, as both a diversity of tactics in the face of a common enemy, and by Kristen Ross, an academic ally of the ZAD and a historian of French struggle, as the formation of a collective subject from a diversity of individuals engaged in maintaining the occupation through its many metamorphoses. Ross is highlighting the spatial element of composition, and different than the squares, the ZAD was situated in a rural geography, which allowed people to organize around reproductive commons, communal labor. This made of the Zadistes inhabitants or dwellers rather than campers. For Ross, this made the shared project of the soil, as well as the defense of a territory, something directly political in a way that transcends identitarian and ideological difference. The notion of defense against a common enemy is key in understanding the ZAD. This allowed for, despite all of these differences, a diversity of tactics. In its best mode, the ZAD would allow for the more autonomous and radical elements of the struggle to carry out more militant actions, whilst the more liberal factions of the ZAD were content not to denounce, but to allow all of these autonomous elements to go and do their own thing. When we think about defense, too, we could think about the positing of a collective value. And we'll come back to defense as a foundation for composition later. This is defense in action. I'm going to skip over some of the contested compositions at the ZAD, but it's enough to say that, again, there was the positing of a collective unity in this organization of defense, but it was a lot more complicated than that based on eyewitness accounts, people that were there. There was a lot of conflict internal to the occupation movement itself, certain tensions within composition. and talk to me afterwards about how the ZAD ended. And there's people here I've talked to that were even part of the ZAD, and they can tell you the story themselves. And composition was actually talked about here as something that was a minority faction of people that rendered invisible these internal conflicts for the advantage of the most powerful. So some conclusions so far is that composition can produce this idea of false unity rather than develop a collective subject concretely. Inhabiting together doesn't necessarily provide a new context for unity, it's more difficult. State violence is the context behind our composition. It can often lead to reformist results. And the ZAD actually eventually recomposed into quite a bourgeois form now. It looks nothing like its autonomous geography of the past. So the time left, I'm sorry it's short, but we're going to talk a little bit about les Soulèvements de la Terre. And who are they? So they are formed out of assembly in 2021 after the ZAD. Some of its founding members were from Notre-Dame-de-Lens. They bring together climate activists, farmers, trade unionists, a whole bunch of people, again with that strategic ideological differences possibly, with the object of weaving together a network of local struggles, building commons on a larger scale. Because they operate as a decentralized network and they operate both at the national and the local level, they're able to coordinate mass actions. And in this December 2023, this was against Lafarge, the concrete industry. They managed to do 40 simultaneous actions against Lafarge all across France, as well as Belgium and Switzerland. And this offers a different model of praxis for environmental movements, which are often restricted to lobbying the state or just doing national demos. This should excite us. Beyond the seasons of action on concrete, they've now moved on to the war on water, the war for water. And this is linked up with the peasant union, La Confédération Paysanne, and the protest group Non Bassarin Merci. And it's almost impossible to state how much, since Les Soulèvements joined up with these movements, how much they've been able to amplify this previously quite local parochial struggle into something of national, even international significance. The picture in the top left is from Saint-Soline in 2023. Where 30,000 people were deployed in a mass demo against a mega basin, and it's blown up into one of the historical demos of France, and is an object of so much discourse there. And if you want to know why mega basins suck, obviously talk to me afterwards. But what's interesting is the ideological grounding behind SDLT and what they're doing with composition, which is again a really explicit strategy for them. So they're calling for a water international. And if we were at Alex's talk yesterday, we can think about how they're trying to transcend this transnationalism of climate movements, and they're trying to build an ecological international. And at La Ville de l'Eau, which was the water village, a giant camp, the most logistically impressive feat I've ever been at, in July 2024, they had delegates from Rojava, from Palestine, Colombia, Mexico, Catalan, Chile, Italy. And this demonstrates this internationalist scope of composition organized around water justice and the defense of water. So defense again becomes primary and becomes the idea that we can create an international composition organized around the defense of water and positing it as a global commons. And they managed to attract over more than 300 peasant, indigenous, environmentalist, feminist, and trade union organizations. So it's a very large composition that we're dealing with. Baptiste Morisot is a handsome guy, but he articulates this kind of praxis where once a collective position is clarified, such as how water is to be shared in the commons or the absurdity of megabasins, we do not need everyone to align themselves with a restricted political ideology. We can just be ourselves and create a common front to support the movement. And in the we can just be ourselves, we can detect the same compositional hope present in the squares. Simply being there, sharing space, contesting the same injustice and atrocity is enough to compose a new unity and a new collective subject. We should, of course, interrogate this. But we should be alerted to the various scales of composition which SDLT are pursuing, and this is quite novel. It's very French. We have a rhizomatic network which attempts to compose a national collective together. funnel them into local situated struggles, whereas Baptiste says a collective position to place is clarified. And then we have an eclectic range of students, graduates, researchers, activists, scientists, environmentalists, punks, all heading to support the struggle. And this is not new in French history. We can think about the Larzac in the 70s, where students and workers traveled down to help peasants resist the expansion of a military base. Oh, okay. I'm going to conclude anyway. So the main thing I want to articulate with the scales of composition is how do we manage these different scales of composition and how do we make them all agree with each other? And if we've got autonomous anti-capitalists at the local level, and we've got we've got people in the EU Parliament basically all agreeing that we are the uprising of the earth, and this is what I'm articulating with this image here, is various really popular French personalities all agreeing with the movement, but it's also inclusive of autonomous anti-capitalist and anarchist militancy, is we've obviously got a compositional problem on our hands. And yeah, I'll end. Okay. I want to just posit this last thing. So we went from the proletariat as a unity in itself. What SDLT articulate is we are water defending itself. In the ZAD, we are the land defending itself. If we are nature defending itself, is this a new context for a collective subject? That's the question. And I'll not articulate that further. Okay.
Since we went a little bit over,
I'm so sorry. Yeah.
any brief questions? If not, there's always the opportunity to pick up on these discussions afterwards. Yes, please.
Ewan,
Hi, George.
congratulations.
Thanks.
I thought we were going to more philosophical discussion. However, I'll go back to my roots. Capitalism does not exist without the working class. That's the answer.
Question?
That's the question.
Agree.
Resolved. Anything else? Yes, please.
That was awesome. I'm so interested in the spatial aspect of composition, and I'm curious why you decided to kind of look at it spatially, especially in encampments and defending like common territory. And then if you have any thoughts about how that's kind of playing out in the like international struggle for Palestine, I'd love to hear it.
Oh God, yeah, cool. Yeah, so I came to it because I help organize Climate Camp back home, and Climate Camp is taken on kind of an international. It's kind of proliferated, especially around Europe, and that's a temporary autonomous geography. It lasts usually around 5 days. It's very open, very inclusive. It attracts a broad range, and being part of that camp, they do consensus decision making, very horizontal, it's very anarchist in principle. And what you notice is there's huge ideological differences within the people that are gathered in the assembly at these camps often. And these can be quite stark sometimes. So we had some XR people in the UK come up, and they were, for instance, wanting to be chatty with the police and be happy, go lucky with them, kumbaya. And obviously that wasn't good for a lot of us. And so we were faced with a compositional problem of how do we obviously both oppose fossil infrastructure, but how do we become kind of a unified force when we have this difference, and what's our common ground? And because the spatial element is because the camp only lasted 5 days, so we didn't have enough time to actually get into that. So you just have those problems, you do a demo, and then you all leave, and you don't actually resolve it. The reason I was attracted to the ZAD was because that was a 10-year occupation, and the fact that after 10 years, though it ended the way it did, and to be brief, it was basically they won their victory against the airport, but then a more kumbaya faction of the ZAD decided, against the wishes of the more autonomous members, to basically agree, negotiate with the state to parcel up the ZAD as part of it back into property, and help in the eviction of its more autonomous members. So even after 10 years, there was a composition that had not been resolved into a unity. So the question is, does the spatial element help? Does it detract? Does it become a pressure cooker? Is this resolved via an assembly, or do you need other mediating structures? And in the Zad's case, the assembly wasn't enough. You needed something else.
I'm going to cut you off there.
Okay. I
Thank
didn't get to talk about Palestine, but I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's something we can pick up after. Okay, our next speaker is Jennifer Eva Pillau. Did I get it correctly?
If you go to the, they closed it, so it's this one. Back to that, yes, it's like, and these.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to be here today. I'm really touched and honored to be among so many social activists and scholars that are so dedicated to healing our world. So thank you for that also. As for my part, I entered the field of modern matriarchal studies after spending many years in traditional healing arts, including traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurveda. Here I was well trained to seek root causes of what ails us in disease conditions. This led me to inquire deeply into what is going on at the roots of our social fabric that is creating the conditions for perpetual chronic social, ecological, and physiological dis-ease. It is very clear that people and planet are holistically unwell, and that we are dependent on cruel, uncaring, and exploitative structures and business interests for our means of subsistence. Infants, children, elders, and other vulnerable people are not receiving appropriate care and nourishment. We're increasingly estranged from the earth and from one another, with forced migrations, genocides, and many manners of cultural dissolution still actively destroying what remnants of social integrity still exist. Matriarchy is not just a women's movement. It's about recreating social systems capable of taking action for human rights, for the health and well-being of people and planet, and for social and cultural sustainability. If grassroots efforts are about community political organizing, matriarchy as a social system represents an opportunity to transform our patterns of coexistence from roots to branches, including our relationships, our neurophysiology, our quality of physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being, and our relationship with the earth. Matriarchy is not theoretical. It is historically demonstrated and enduring. The field of modern matriarchal studies, founded by Dr. Heide Gotner-Abendroth, is constructed upon decades of research and scholarship from around the world. Gotner-Abendroth's research model methodically verifies matriarchy as a stable and sustainable societal model that intelligently self-organizes from below. I've studied directly with Dr. Gotner-Abendroth, but I'd like to tell you about just a few of the other key researchers who have informed my understanding of what matriarchy is. Lithuanian archaeologist Marija Gimbutas, who we also heard about yesterday, saw evidence in Neolithic and Bronze Age Europe that strongly suggested egalitarian societies without evidence of organized warfare, and suggesting a veneration of women and the natural cycles of life. Dr. Barbara Alice Mann has written extensively on the matriarchal culture of the Native American Iroquois, notably in her book, Iroquoian Women, the Gantulisas,
in which she corrects misinterpretations of earlier records by European missionaries and settlers. Genevieve Vaughn's work is significant for developing maternal gift economy theory and for founding the maternal gift economy movement. Societies of Peace is another notable volume which documents the contributions of the first and second matriarchal world congresses that were organized and hosted by Dr. Gotner-Abendroth. It demonstrates that matriarchal knowledge has been developed through cooperative and diverse intercultural contributions, including indigenous and non-indigenous scholarship. That matriarchies have endured and survived into the present era, at least to some degree, given the staggering level of abuse and plunder perpetrated by modern nation states, is a testament to their hard-won wisdom and resilience. This partial list of cultures, documented in Gotner-Abendroth's research, gives us a sense of how widely spread matriarchal patterns are, historically and in present times, and also shows us that Europe is the only continent where matriarchal patterns no longer exist. You may be asking yourself, why use the word matriarchy when we are all so traumatized by patriarchy? And there are so many assumptions made and triggers that are set off when we use such a word. Many scholars that have recognized similar patterns of social organization have quite rationally adopted other terms for this reason. There is value in reclaiming this word, however. First and foremost, several cultures refer to themselves as matriarchal, and it is not our place to challenge this. Secondly, when we consider the meaning of the root archi, we find that it has a second meaning besides domination or rule. It also means in the beginning. For instance, the word menarche does not mean rule of the menstrual cycle. It means beginning of the menstrual cycle. The interpretation of women or mothers at the beginning fits when we understand the social patterns of matriarchal societies. We can summarize the definition of matriarchy in just a few words: women-centered, egalitarian, and consensus-based. This is demonstrated and practiced at all levels of society, including at the social, economic, political, and cultural levels. A spiritual worldview is at the center of matriarchal life. All of life is precious according to matriarchal spirituality, and this ethic is evident at all levels of society. Symbolically and practically placing mothers and children at the center of society serves to keep life-affirming values top of mind in all decisions and activities. The natural cycles of life, death, and regeneration are regarded as holy and are closely observed and celebrated. This creates a relationship of reverence and gratitude between people and planet, making careless, abusive, and extractive behaviors utterly foolish to matriarchal people. In the way that matriarchies organize themselves, balance among genders, generations, and between humans and nature is maintained. Women live by their own authority and are protected, respected, and esteemed for doing so. In matriarchy, maternal care is understood to be the essential cornerstone upon which a healthy and high-functioning social order is constructed. Nurturing life, all of life, as a good mother would, is a spiritual principle. This is believed to be so critically important that all adult members of the community actively engage in the humane behaviors of care, nourishment, nurturance, and protection. The basic social unit of matriarchal societies is the matriclan. This means that family lineage is traced through the mother's line, and that adult children and grandchildren, Adult children and grandchildren live in or close to the mother's clan house. This is true for women and men, as sons and brothers play important roles in matriarchal social and political life. I'd like to try to suggest why these features are or could be relevant to our current predicament. This constellation of kinship living reliably provides for many crucially important human needs, including a deeply rooted sense of safety and belonging for children as well as adults. The strategic placement of mothers and children at the center of social life is very important. First and foremost, it allows for mothers' needs to be met during the vulnerable stages of pregnancy, childbirth, and new motherhood. This simple fact is a transformative factor for modern mothers and children, generally coping in situations of relative isolation, exhaustion, and emotional distress. In matriarchy, we are all mothers, so biological motherhood is much less of a determining factor. Our unique talents are highly valued by society in both domestic and public realms. Matriclan living effectively prevents situations where domestic abuse is likely to happen and protects boys and men from desperate social circumstances that leave them susceptible to emotional instability, addiction, criminal behavior, and recruitment by militant gangs. Matriclan living preserves social and economic stability for women, children, and men in the case of romantic relationships breaking down or ending in divorce. Importantly, however, the communal provider-protector nature of the clan allows spaciousness for intimate and pleasure-filled relationships to flourish by removing the weight of the world's responsibilities from the shoulders of the couple. This naturally makes enduring, intimate relations more likely to succeed. Uh-oh. Can somebody get me back online? Pardon? In the meantime, matriarchal economies are entrusted to the clan's women. Thank you. Thank you. Women are responsible for managing equitable distribution of essential goods according to need and the sacred principle of balanced reciprocity. Matriarchal economies are locally and regionally based subsistence economies. This means taking only what's needed. Subsistence in this context does not mean scarcity. Rather, it means enough. Matriarchal politics are based on communal consensus making. The heart of political life is located in the clan house or the neighborhood meeting house, where human needs and interpersonal relations are matters of daily concern. Policy decisions are deliberated where all members of the community are encouraged to participate. In this way, intelligence of each individual is both assumed and developed through the expectation of active engagement of matters of importance. Through culture and spirituality, the life-giving and nurturing behavior of mothering is rendered a sophisticated, rational, and humane societal model. Feminine and masculine aspects are honored and appreciated and mirror the quality of relations necessary for a sensitive relationship of mutual reciprocity between humans and the earth. Thank you. Sorry. I was saying thank you to her. So I just want to contrast. I want to contrast for a moment. I don't think I need to say much. Euro-American culture with what is known about matriarchal culture. It's common that we wear manufactured corporate logos and demonstrate our athleticism and level of wealth, and drive cars that are identifiable according to class and economic standard. We salute flags and sing national anthems at the beginning of our school days and public events, and watch often violent Hollywood dramas on electronic screens. And the sporting events we enjoy, such as the American Super Bowl, where highly paid men crash into one another for sport and to win, while female cheerleaders entertain and encourage the crowd from the sidelines. Matriarchal cultural norms are quite different. It's common for indigenous matriarchal peoples to handcraft their clothing and housewares in distinguishing patterns of their own artisanal designs. Seasonal celebrations commonly honor the planting of seeds, the harvest, and even the importance of the dormant period of winter. Gifting festivals, in which women are dressed in their most beautiful costumes to symbolically represent earth mothers, priestesses, or mother goddesses, ritualize and celebrate the art of giving. In this way, goods are practically and generously distributed among clans, neighbors, and other guests. So to wrap up, I believe our task is to begin again. We know very well that it's hard to care about each other in a meaningful way if we can't feel each other, and if we don't really know anything about the lived reality of the other. As the mythic image of the Greek goddess Hestia holding the communal hearth fire with abiding dignity suggests, ambient space where warm and friendly human relations can develop must be central to the infrastructure of sustainable modern communities. Bookchin emphasized the importance of the neighborhood assembly. The idea of gathering around a hearth in every home and neighborhood may ring fanciful in comparison, but the practical utility of the hearth is indisputable. If humans are to survive and thrive into the future, the fine arts of proper physical and emotional nourishment, warm communal resonance, and respectful consensus making must be relearned and reintegrated. Thank you.
Questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, Jennifer, you said that in Europe there's no more matriarchal society. Do you have a theory as to why?
We are the colonizers.
No, but maybe in North America there's still, there's a matriarchal society in Asia and stuff. So why not in Europe? What have we done?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think we did that. No. In a lot of places, what's left is remnants. Almost all of the cultures have been colonized, at least to some degree. So there's memory, there's historical record, there's archaeological records. A lot of it we have to piece back together, including our own European matriarchal history, which is Maria Gimbutas brought through for us in a way that hasn't been available in other interpretations of history. Yeah. So if there's one takeaway from this dialogue, it's that this material it's had to be independent and goes outside of mainstream academia to be developed. And it's a body of work that's well worth our attention and to try and understand more deeply for its relevance to our current predicament.
Yes, please. I'm interested in this sort of studies as well, but as much as I have done research, there is no matriarchal society in the world according to the cultural anthropologists. There are matrilineal, matrilocal, but not matriarchal. Yeah, in your slides, I have seen that matrilineal, matrilocal, but in your expression, you have mentioned that centralization, autonomy at the same time. How those two match together with centralization?
Decentralization. Decentralization, yes.
Okay, also mothering and through mothering connection, biological determinism took us to the private areas, we as feminists try to get rid of all those walls years and years since the voting rights.
Indeed.
I mean, how did that sort of different ideas get together? Then we don't need any centralized power anymore. We need autonomy and decentralized power to ourselves as women. I don't know how it doesn't work in my mind. Another being against patriarchy, trying to create matriarchy, it's not my way of personal thing as feminist, eco-feminist. I'm an eco-feminist.
And your question is exactly, I think I've lost track of the question.
I mean, it's controversial in my mind. Women are nurturing.
That's fair.
And care work. It's a lot of work already on our shoulders.
So that I can respond to that. Yeah.
Mixed together, I can't understand. It's not our freedom.
Yes. So as I said a moment ago, I recommend looking into the research because our ideas about gender and gender roles are very, very narrow, whereas in Indigenous perspectives, it's much wider, broader ideal that we don't really have the context to understand. So getting into the field of, the research on the societies themselves, from the scholars themselves, is a great way to understand that. There's no way I can that in a moment. But the fact of the matriarchal society is not that women are the mothers and, they're relegated, into the domestic realm all by themselves to carry all that work on their shoulders. The point is the entire society behaves like a good mother. Everybody bears the responsibility of that ethic and that work and that priority in politics, in social life, in all aspects. So it actually, I understand how it seems contradictory, but it does the opposite. It relieves us of that because it's a shared responsibility, and it's also not a shamed responsibility. There's not this idea that one realm of work is for weak, not very smart people, and another realm of work in the public is for smart, intelligent go-getters. All realms are very highly honored and work as counterparts. Thank you for the question.
Any other questions? Yes, please.
Just curious, in your research, did you read any of Öcalan's books or Graeber's books and how they integrate into your learnings?
I have. Öcalan, yes, I've read some of Öcalan's material, and I've seen that he mentions matriarchy, which I thought is interesting. And again, it's something that's a much broader conversation. I don't know that work enough, but I certainly was drawn to be interested in triangulating between social ecology, the Kurdish women's movement, and matriarchy for similar patterns that seem to be coming through. So that's a big part of the reason why I'm here. I think there's value in sharing these movements.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Four minutes left. And I thought that if there are any other questions now that we've heard everybody on the panel that people have had a chance to think about, maybe we could address them. I would like to have one.
I want to say something.
Can I just finish? I would like to make one question, but I will make that at the end before anybody else who would like to go. Yes. Yes, please.
About the procedure, since Christos is not going to participate, we have 15 more minutes.
The session ends now.
Yes.
This session ends now in 5 minutes.
Yes.
Christos is not in this session.
Let's keep the session like it is.
Christos is not in the session.
So let's finish.
Yeah. Session ends in 4 minutes. So yes, please.
Hi. Thank you, everybody. Ewan.
Hi, Ewan.
Sorry. So I'm still kind of formulating this question, but I interesting in some of the language of the French movement, the uprising of the earth, that there was almost kind of this militaristic language, like defending and our struggles. And it had me thinking about some of the indigenous water protection movements in North America, and how that's kind of it's a different worldview and it's a different way of language and it's a different way of behavior, because from what I know, those movements are also like non-violent. I don't know anything about them, shared. So I'm just wondering for you, if you feel like there might be kind of a difference between defense and protection and what those values.
Yeah, I think that's key. It's a great question. So Kristen Rosso, I mentioned, has tried to make an argument in light of Rizad and Soulèvements using the word defense. She prefers defense to resistance because she thinks that resistance already concedes something to the state, and defense posits something that you collectively value. So you can organize around that collective value. And she cites the Black Panthers, and the full name was Black Panther Party of Self-Defense, that posits blackness as a value around which we can collectively organize. And I think the First Nations example is well chosen because they defend their territories, their ancestors, their cultural memory, and that makes their, like when you look at the blockade, the Trans Mountain Pipeline, it's not like a political action they're making. They're defending their territory. It's like a cultural injunction. It's like they're not resisting something. It's like they're moved to defend their fundamental identity. So whether defense has this militaristic connotation and all its machismo and everything, like I think it's a good question. But I think it's trying to borrow more from these kinds of indigenous global South, Latin American kind of defense of commons. I think they're trying to link up with that and federate in a way that's internationalist. Because their repertoire of actions are often quite peaceful and not always like militant. But yeah, defense is something I'd like to look into more. Yeah.
Thank you. No, I'm just going to make one final question to this speaker, to Orestes. I was wondering whether or not the historical practices of commoning in relation to water usage in villages in Greece has something to offer today, whether in terms of a practice that might take some modern form or whether in terms of convincing people that this did happen in some places and perhaps is possible. I'm just wondering if that has any, do you think any relevance or importance right now?
Yes. Well, in my opinion, the problem is that any practice prior to 60s in Greece is just a myth now. So we have to reinvent, in any case, forms of collaboration by using anything, but we have to reinvent.
Thank you. Session is concluded.
Yes, yes, that's true. I'm very happy.
Κάνανε μόνο αυτό. Βασικά δεν ήταν. Βασικά εμένα σκέψη που ήταν επειδή είδα πολύ πεσημιστική τα συμπεράσματα του τέτοιου για πώς κάτι με το κόμμα θα κάνανε. Ήταν. Αλλά αυτό είναι το θέμα. Υπάρχει μεγάλο μπέρδεμα μεταξύ των γραμμών και δημόσιων. Αν θα τι τα υπερασπιζόμαστε, φταίει η δεκαετία. Υπάρχει και μας δεν αμήνως. Το γεγονός ότι το think global υπάρχει πρόβλημα. Πώς αποκομίσει.
Και οδηγεί σε άλλη
Διαφορετικά καταλήγει να έχεις και περίεργα. Κατά τον εντάξει. Και εγώ σημειώνω
στο σύγμα
ωραία, να κλείνω το σημειώνω επισήμως και όπου και έξι, 9, 40.
Does anyone have something to take out? Our question.
Hello, how are you guys? Are you presenting? Okay, amazing. Do you have? I'm copying the. You have a presentation or PDF? PDF. Okay, great, fantastic. Okay, so PDF you can put on the desktop if you want. Okay, here, leave this up. Bueno.
Okay.
Hey, hello, how are you? You're Alicia. Amazing.
Yeah, I sent you this.
All right.
So,
On Telegram. Amazing. Amazing. Good. You want to check it out? Is it the PowerPoint?
yeah.
Ah, yes. Amazing. Okay, so Emet,
5 minutes. Picture.
I mean, we will start in 5 minutes anyway. Don't worry too much. We're not.
In 10 minutes.
Five, 10. Wow. And
No, we are.
are you? Yes.
Yes.
Oh my God, yeah, okay. Podemos hablar español. Entonces. Ah, vale, sí. Ah, genial, sí. Vale, me estaba preguntando, ¿cómo te enteraste de la conferencia? ¿Puede ser por alguien que se llama Neus?
No, yo me enteré porque vine hace 5 años a hacer el Erasmus en Antioch.
Ah, ok, ok.
Y vine a la conferencia
Vale.
de 2019.
Vale.
Y estaba en la newsletter
Ya.
y me llegó el Fall for Papers y
Qué guay, vale, genial. Porque sé que había una amiga de Cataluña, había compartido el correo y pensaba, igual, pues no sé, solo te quería. Vale, guay.
Hey, come here. Here.
Let's see how it goes. I'm trying to you're the participant. Outside, outside. Olivia. Yeah. Yes. I know she's here. She's here. I don't know. So much.
Hold on.
I think he's outside. Yeah. Hello, Susanna, do you hear us? Hello. Oh, wait. If you hear us, can you write it on the chat? I cannot hear you. Okay, now we hear you. Amazing, yes. So we are about to start in like 5 minutes, okay? We will let you know when it's your turn. Okay, can you write? Sorry, can you write on the chat because there's a lot of noise in the room. I don't hear you properly. You have the fourth? Do you know all the four people? We have Susanna here, Elias, Olivia.
We are three. Christos.
True, true. Fair enough. Okay.
We have three speakers. Okay, which I will call people to start. Yeah. I'm calling people to start.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just setting up Susanna.
Um, how many minutes per speaker?
15.
15.
And then 5 minutes of questions.
Okay.
So the suggestion is to take 2 or 3 questions.
Okay.
It's 20 minutes or 15?
Sorry?
The presentation is 20 or 15 minutes?
Well, actually, normally it's 15, but it's true that someone is not in the panel.
Okay.
But yeah, more 15 than 20. Like, if you go to, I think Emet will try 15. You thought it was 20, no?
Between, I can speed it up or
Okay.
more chill. I don't
Okay, I think that 15 and a bit flexible is okay, but is that okay for you as well, Olivia? 15, you are aiming for that? Susanna, can you try sharing the screen, please? ¿Qué tal? Bien. ¿Todo bien? Sí, bueno, está intentando bueno, en el Zoom.
¿Quién va en el Zoom?
But I mean, it's not our Zoom, so. So it's not our Zoom, but so I don't know if it's completely fine to share the screen.
Our Zoom? What do you mean? You mean for the
We have a
presentation?
problem. We have a problem because it's not our Zoom. Yeah.
Awesome is
Because that's not our Zoom. It's someone else.
está aquí. Vale. Está en el escritorio, vale. Aquí está, vale.
Where is it?
No, 15 we said, but I mean, let's say 17 because Christos is not here. Okay.
Where is it?
So
Is it in the Zoom?
yeah, the Zoom is here. So I don't know if you need to. Why is it not showing up? Wait a minute. Yes.
Okay.
So
And we are.
you have-
Okay. So. Wait.
actually,
you didn't claim.
okay.
First of all.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, now yes, no?
Now we can make her
And you can say
call.
Okay.
and then you can do the same.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. Now, she's the only one, so it'll be okay. Thank you.
Okay. Like, okay, energize. One, good. When I say three, we should clap. Energize. One. Wow. Two, three. Can we make one slap? More energy we need. One, two, three.
Hey.
Okay, our first speaker is Elias Casanovas Adrián from Spain. His title is The Village's Hearth Model, the emergence of pastoralism as a tool for integrated landscape management. It's quite interesting topic. We should
Where
learn
did you put
from
it
the
in
animals.
on the desk?
In this Anthropocene age, we have in a trouble with a human-centric lifestyle. What to learn from other species now? It's important to design our land and yeah.
You know where is the full screen? Okay.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, so my name is Elias. Before starting, I wanted to thank the organization. For me, it's an honor to be here. I first came to this conference 5 years ago when I was doing my Erasmus studies here in Athens. And now it's for me an honor to be able to be here and bring new ideas and perspectives on the debates that we have. And it's as well intimidating because there have been big people speaking about big subjects, and I just hope to be interesting and to motivate you in what interests me as well. So, what I will be presenting is a research that I have done in the context of a master in the School of Landscape of Versailles in Paris. And the topic that I was working on is the shepherds. The shepherds, pastoralism, and the reason what I got interested in this, I think it's also interesting for us in this debate because it connects strictly with the idea of praxis, even before theory. And I was reflecting a lot on why did I choose this topic. I didn't have a personal reason, but I realized it was kind of a reaction to this perspective of I deleted the idea of landscape management, this idea of scientific or rationalized perspective on reality. And I wanted to go as close as possible to the rural reality. And I think that's why I decided to get close to shepherds and pastoralism, although I have no relation. And here I stand, I think, as a kind of mediator. I don't want to show myself also as an expert. I wouldn't like to be seen as that. So let's start and see where it goes. Okay, so first of all, I want to reflect all together in the idea of landscape I propose and why do I propose it. We have been debating a lot on the idea of the city and how it is produced and the political struggles that we live in the city. And the way I see landscape is some kind of extended idea of the city, an idea that includes as well the natural spaces, the rural spaces, in which the struggle is not only between humans, but also with other alive creatures such as animals, plants, and why not the weather or topography. And we start establishing these dialogues. And I brought this representation. It's from the Renaissance, and it's called The Good Effects of Government in the Countryside or the City. And what I wanted to reflect on is this artist, he was observing on how it's a sum of all the little practices that we do, the kind of landscapes that we produce. So there is, in fact, a correlation between the political organization and the type of landscapes that we have. From this point of view, I decided to approach pastoralism and see how it, as a practice, relates to landscape, how it transforms it, and how it can transform it. And it has done it in very different ways through history. As you see here, the amount of animals that were being used to as a pastoral exploitation has changed a lot throughout history, especially in the modern era with the production of wool. It was, let's say, the peak. And also at this time, it was even harmful for the environment because there were too many animals or too many forests were cut. And something that is interesting to me in parallel to this evolution of the profession is how the figure of the shepherd has also been transformed, maybe from a role model that it's how it was seen, for example, to represent Jesus Christ in the beginning of the first millennia, to, after the industrialization, some kind of weird figure that is lost in the mountain. We don't really know who he is, that it kind of correlates with the takeover, let's say, of the scientific knowledge and the industrialized exploitation of land. So one of my objectives is also to think back this idea. The case study that I worked on is 3 different shepherds that are young. They ages go from 40 to 25 years old. They are based in Catalonia, where I come from. We share the same language. And what I am observing is an emergence of a new type of pastoralism, which appears due to different social situations, which is a problem of fire prevention, the revalorization of cultural heritage, the local food production, the questioning of patriarchy, and the ruralist movement. For example, 2 of my case studies, they were people that were born in the city, and when they were older, in their 30s, they decided to leave and go live in the country. And one very interesting thing, should I close this?
Just click on your
Yeah, the Zoom dropped too.
Yeah, put it aside.
I will just put it here.
You can close it or close it and connect that. No.
Okay.
Sorry about
Yes, I will move on. Yeah, what I find interesting, or what I have tried in this research, is to have an innocent look to what's going on and then try to come up with what it can look like. And to go, well, I used an action research methodology, but I don't want to bore you with that. This is how it looks a little bit, all the field work that I have done, all the stays that I did with the shepherds. I was living with them for several days, but the outcome that is more important to me is this image here, which is the friendship that I developed with them. And this is a very interesting perspective to me because I struggled a lot approaching them as an expert. They would be very close to me. And then I realized that it didn't make any sense. I just had to be a human being, normal, and try to become friends with them. And from that, it appeared a feeling of mutual interest. And slowly, as if you would meet any other person, I started learning from them. I summarize here very synthetically the results of my research that I structured in 6 different categories. Maybe we can go deeper in the questions if you are interested or afterwards, because what interests me is a slight transformation from a productive economy when the shepherds were producing meat or they were producing wool to some kind of service economy. Because now the main activity that the example I will explain you after is doing is fire prevention. And he's being hired to do that. He's not depending on a market system. And that completely transforms the profession. So let's see it in detail. What I mean by care, I explain it a lot from this image and how caring transforms the natural environment. Because if you look closer, it's a baby sheep that is being fed with a goat. We could say it's anti-natural, but it works. And humans are intervening in taking care of this little animal with another one. And we could scale this idea to the whole landscape on how through our care we are transforming and we are affecting the patterns and the and the ecological cycles that exist. The other image, I didn't bring it because it would be traumatizing, but it's when they cut the head of the animal. This is also a debate that we need to embrace. As we talk about love and life, we also have to talk about death. And for me, it's controversial, but it's very important also to face it. And if we start zooming out and we observe here, imagine it's the herd, the sheep, and how they move around and they somehow establish a dialogue with the different kinds of topographies, the different kinds of biotopes that exist, and they eat the plants, and so they transform the landscape by doing that. If we step up a little bit more, the first map is a square of 5 per 5 kilometers or 3.5 per 3.5, and the red area is the place where the shepherd is supposed to do the fire prevention. Do we get it more or less? Okay. The second image is the different paths that he followed over 20 days. And because he would have eaten the plants in one place, then the other day the animals would go somewhere else, or because it was raining, they would go somewhere else, etc., etc. And if we overlap all the paths, we get this, which is some kind of system in the end. And through this activity, he's reuniting space, let's say. And what it gives is from perspective, from a perceptive point of view, he has a very accurate understanding of nature. Like they would all perfect. They would all tell me and explain me every name of every plant and what it's used for. But it's not only that they understand the plant or what it is, but they feel it somehow. And that to me is very interesting. And I built this mental map. I was trying to reconstruct the elements or the landmarks that they use to orientate. And for them, it ends up being as important a tree than a house, than the peak of a mountain. So it's really a very deep understanding of this natural space that many times we struggle to understand as our lives are very based in the urban space. Then the highlight area is the same shape that we were seeing before, like this spatial net, overlap with the different kind of habitats that we find, different kind of plants. And here's a collection of one day of pasturing and the different plants that we were finding. Okay, this is an image just to show how we encounter diversity and how we are interacting with it. And in the end, the animals are pooping biological matter. And if it's done in the correct amount, then it becomes good for the environment and it has a positive ecological cycle. Another very interesting thing is that because he was working inside of the village or very close, he will have constant social interactions with people. So somehow I see the change of an exchange of knowledge between the shepherd and his vision and the needs and the interests of the local population, which brings me to the idea, okay, this is the space that is built all around the urban. And to me, it's very interesting because it can be seen as a transition space between the totally wild, the urban, and some kind of midpoint where animals can come and humans can come and there can be some kind of exchange. And the final model would be that, to sum it up with a section on how the shepherd and his activity is kind of establishing a relation of exchange between the urban space and this activity. And the idea that I propose is that every small village should have a shepherd and should have a herd. And the shepherd should evolve from being some kind of animal raiser than being a landscape surveillant somehow or landscape caretaker and a mediator, because he's having such an accurate understanding of landscape, he can inform. And why not complement his education or his cultural knowledge with knowledge from geography or ecology? Not okay. One of the case studies, he had studied agriculture engineer, and he could have a more abstract understanding of what he was doing as a shepherd. And that for me is very interesting because it allows it to bring it to another level. And also it allows him to communicate with other kind of professions, which is where I find interesting in the end. And that's it.
Conclusions, two questions, comments. Yeah.
It's not really a question, it's just a remark. I come from a place where the goats that they are, I think, like they have created a problem of the natural the environment because there are these European there is a funding anyway, which is like, okay, as an idea, it's good because it's supposed to promote human jobs anyway at the remote places in Greece. But because of this money that people take and sometimes like they stopped using the old ways, like they bring down the old walls that they used to separate certain places, so the goats now are, I mean, like there's so many and everywhere that it has become the opposite. Okay, there are some fire preventions because they eat, a lot and they eat everything. So you have ancient forests that there is a specific kind of oak there that is very it can be really it's old, it's really really old. So instead of going in the forest where it's supposed it should be condensed and dense and with a lot of diversity, now you see nothing. It's just like desert underneath the oaks.
There is a rotational grazing techniques.
Of regulation, I think. Like, okay, there should be animals close to the humans and they can be positive. But I think there are examples, I don't know.
Okay.
Where
Yeah, sure.
One more question or comment? Yes, please.
I just wanted to give a comment that I just really appreciate that kind of like the poetry and the creativity that goes into the research, and I was just just that was a story that I was like, it didn't matter what it was about, but I was interested because the way that you presented it is just awesome.
Okay. Would you like to make comment about the question?
Yes, of course. So 6,000 years ago, there was a pastoral revolution which means that humans substituted most of the big herbivores by domesticated herbivores, and they disrupted the ecosystem forever. Like, and it's not like, oh, it happened yesterday. No, it happened 6,000 years ago. From then on, I would say we have a direct responsibility on keeping the ecosystem alive. We created a codependence, direct codependence. What you are mentioning is the opposite of what is happening in Catalonia. What is happening in Catalonia is the absence of animals. People stopped working on it, and forests that didn't exist appeared, and they grew exponentially, and they became like bombs, fire bombs, and now we have mega fires because of it. In the other hand, in places like Samothraki or places in Greece, it's very common that you will have too many animals, and they will eat everything, and they will create erosion in the end because the soil is removed by the water. The midpoint is to have shepherds that are well informed, they are aware of what they are doing, and they have well-paid job, let's say. And this is what I'm trying to propose here in the end. Like the solution is to have people who know what they are doing in the context.
And educated when it comes to
and well educated.
around and connected.
And to follow up with this idea of education, I also realized that it's very, very important, in the one hand, not to lose the cultural heritage, but in the other, to cross it with the knowledge that we have now in terms of ecology and environment, because also cultural heritage destroyed the ecosystem time ago. So it's both. So I think education might be the main issue. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Can I also react to her comment?
Yes.
Yes. Thanks a lot for acknowledging that. And to me, it was also an objective in my research to reach for truth and beauty at the same time. And I think that makes meaningful idea in a way, not just true ideas. So thanks for
one more question. 1 minute.
Sorry, I know it's not easy for me to speak in English. So I'm living in Creta, you know.
Great.
So the problem I think in Greece is that also that there is not good spatial planning. So there is a graph over there, and the owners of the areas there are very like a mafia. I don't know if you know what I mean. In fact, it's very difficult to have a good relationship with the shepherd. So it's a challenge and to communicate and to transfer all this transformation. But also this that I ask is how could be easy for the shepherds to understand the scientists?
Yeah, like also every case is site specific and has different kind of struggles. Because what you mentioned, I see that behind there's not only a problem of disinformation from the shepherds of the damage that they are doing, but also a political struggle of land owning or so I guess it's both, like people who have a different vision or how should be the island. They need to struggle against the shepherds, which is crazy because now I was like being very bucolic for the shepherds and so on. But yeah, I guess in every place you can.
Very quick. Thank you for the presentation. And I wanted to say also that the mention of the animal themselves, because and I see how this can be like used for landscape management, but it's still like living creatures that we kind of use for this. I'm wondering if in the research you have also this dimension and these questions. I don't know much, but just a question.
Yes. I do have these questions, and it's very difficult because I mean, when I went for the first time with the shepherds, it was actually my first time being in minority as a animal species. It's true. And it's not obvious when you are surrounded by 200 sheep and you have to deal with it. And yes, you start empathizing with them when it's the majority. And so the shepherd is interesting because um, he has to follow the needs of the animals, like he's in minority somehow. And he has to understand them to be able to do the activity that he's doing. Has to know the needs of eating, sleeping, and. So overall, the animal raising practices, I think, is the most empathetic. But then to include this empathy in the research, for me, is the next level challenge. And for me, it's a very interesting topic to research both in terms of artistic and scientific perspective. But yeah, for me, it's a future challenge to include.
Okay, thank you to Elias. Christos Kotakis. We are allocating more time for the questions and the comments. Now, Susanna Ludwig online on Zoom, adapting forest gardening for urban settings, another interesting area for human beings, how to provide our food through good forests and connection with nature. And again, domesticated seeds like animals, we have issues to balance with our food system as well. That's another interesting topic.
Yeah.
Hello, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, hello. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers of this weekend conference. Unfortunately, I was not able to travel to Athens because of health reasons, but I've been following the organic contributions with a lot of interest. So again, thank you, and thank you as well to my fellow panelists. A bit about myself. My name is Anna Ruki, and I'm in the process of completing a Master's of Science degree in climate change at King's College London. I wrote my paper while doing preliminary research on an area which is like to explore for my master's thesis, and then it's the intersection between two forms of food production, food forestry, and urban gardening, which pose an alternative to our current hegemonic system of industrial agriculture. Now I'm sure I'm going to go into detail about why we need an alternative food system, because everybody here will know about the disadvantages and detrimental effects of industrial agriculture. But just as a quick recap, industrial agriculture relies on monocropping and is maximizing the yield of one single crop at a time, heavy use of artificial fertilizer and pesticides, which causes biodiversity loss, both in terms of plant species and of those species like microbial insects and wildlife communities. Substitution, fertilizer runoff, which is detrimental knock-on effect on many ecosystems, and so on. More broadly, though, I wanted to think about some fundamental binaries that underlie a currently very exploitative and unsustainable relationship with our natural environment, that between the city and rural agricultural spaces, and the binary between quote-unquote wilderness and quote-unquote civilization. And these binaries alienate us from our natural environment and produce an imbalance which John Bellamy Foster describes as the Marxist concept of the metabolic rift. Engels as well wrote about the antithesis between canon and country, the abolition of which would mean, quote, no more and no less utopian than the abolition of the antithesis between capitalists and wage workers. Addressing these dichotomies is also increasingly evident in the world with trade of climate change and ecosystem collapse, as well as food insecurity and growing populations, and it's forcing us to make difficult decisions and trade-offs. between rewilding, protecting ecosystems, and ensuring more secure and effective reproduction. I want you to think about disrupting these dichotomies in ways which would improve food sovereignty and security, increase climate resilience, and reduce negative impacts of our current dominant agricultural system. However, in addition to addressing these very material concerns, I also wanted to think about practices which offer potential for resisting capitalism and colonial logic, which challenge centralized and state control over the means of subsistence, and which prevent alienation from our natural environment and the loss of traditional ecological knowledge. So, food forestry, also called forest gardening. It is a type of agroforestry which describes land use systems which combine forestry with production. Food forestry specifically aims to produce edible species as well as species with other uses, for example, medicinal plants, fodder, species with ritual and aesthetic uses, while mimicking forest ecosystems as closely as possible. This is achieved by combining different plant species, also called intercropping, at different levels arranged in vertical layers. And you can see in this illustration the many different components of a food forest working together in synergy as they would in a natural forest. And this is another illustration of the same concept. Now, research found that human populations have been seeking and adjusting forest ecosystems for their use and to their benefit for a long time before such as agriculture, that it centered on one or more staple crops became dominant. And in the book Against the Grain, James C. Scott traces the history of how this monocrop mode of agriculture became dominant, not because it offered substantial advantages to the population which cultivated the crop, but because it made it easier for early stage to extract harvest to sustain themselves. Even now, these practices still survive today in many countries in the global south. Documented examples include Nepal, India, Java, Sri Lanka, the Caribbean, Mexico, Tanzania, and Morocco. Those remnants are often bulwarks against the marketization and commodification of food production and colonial modes of agriculture, another setting in which traditional ecological knowledge can be cultivated and passed on. And some questions of the examples I mentioned. This is a random garden of complete design in Java, Jamaica, Tanzania, the foot of Mount Kilimanjaro, an example from Nepal, a Kansan food forest in Sri Lanka, and in Kerala, India. And food forests are less prevalent in the global north, but there has also been some interest in the practice in recent years, especially in the Netherlands. Here are some examples. Here are some examples from Ireland and Scotland. And soil forestry is a lot less ecologically destructive than other modes of agriculture. It protects biodiversity, it builds soil, recycles nutrients, and sequesters carbon. It also offers more resilience to climate fluctuations because there are many crops being grown in the same patch of land at the same time. If one of them fails due to weather or pests or disease, there are many others around it to buffer against the failure. There is currently very little literature on the yields produced by food forests, which would allow us to effectively model and draw conclusions about how efficient they would be at meeting nutritional needs. The currently existing paper so far looks at a food forest in the Netherlands. There are complexities involved in studying the nutritional carrying capacity because measures can be based on the ability of the system used to meet either caloric or macronutrient needs. It is difficult to account for its ability to provide micronutrients, and food forests can take a long time to mature, and so outputs vary at different life stages. However, you can, there is some details on this in my paper, so you can look into that if you're interested.
Have you finished? No. Okay. You have time? Still 3 minutes.
Wait, I have 3 minutes left.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I might play for a little bit, or you might have to cut me out.
It's all right. 5 minutes we can give.
Thank you. That's agriculture. Now, this is something that you might be more familiar with, and though it is quite self-explanatory. It involves growing food into like fresh produce overpopulation, the history of it, dates back to earlier cities, for example, the Catholic May civilization, and some remnants survive in the form of, for example, peri-urban jumper or floating gardens on the outskirts of Mexico City. Islands which thanks to rich river sediment provide very fertile soil where high yields of edible crops are grown and harvested. And possibly the most accessible example of urban agriculture in the world is in Havana, Cuba, where after the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s, Cuba lost its most important trading partner. And because of the embargoes and very limited import capacity, the country has to quickly develop its capacity for self-sufficiency in food production. And the estimate of the population of the city's requirements for fresh produce is met by these urban farms range from 50 to 90%. It's very impressive. Here are some versions of that. And the benefit of urban farming include the ability to recycle urban waste and reduce the need for both waste processing and artificial fertilizers, increase climate resilience, for example, reduction of the urban heat island effect and less flooding, increase food sovereignty, and decrease in cost and negative effects associated with transport, benefits to mental and physical health, as well as improve community cohesion and increase ecological literacy. And so what my paper looks at is combining the two food production systems and what it would offer in terms of the synergy of the benefits specific to each one, as well as the amplification, for example, food forests offer great advantages in terms of climate resilience in cities, because this structure is more like those of natural forests than regular urban farms. They are potentially better at reducing high temperatures in cities, the creation of microclimates, and they have potentially greater capacity to reduce flooding because of how trees and perennial species improve soil structure. They also provide shelter and habitats for a greater variety of wildlife, and as they more accurately mimic natural forests, they provide opportunities for more in-depth ecological education. However, there are few documented examples of combined food forestry and urban agriculture, as the practice is not widespread. There is, I've been able to find photos of one, although there are several others. And these are photos from the Picasso food forest in Italy, and you can see how over the span of 10 years, it has gone from a very sort of bare patch of land to a very lush landscape. The research is complicated by the fact that there are conflicting definitions. For example, some of the literature use the phrase urban food forest to describe systems which are only composed of fruit and nut produce, so conventional urban orchards, rather than a holistic multi-layered system. And my paper looks at combining from existing implementations of food forests in urban settings, including the benefits to urban ecosystems and populations, the logistical, ecological, and institutional challenges, as well as proposing some guidelines for successful implementation. Existing examples which are documented in the literature are also geared towards educational assessment and recreational uses rather than strict emphasis on producing large quantities of food to contribute to food security of urban populations. And I have identified this as a potential area for further research and something I hope to focus on in my thesis. Any questions, suggestions, comments, or criticisms would be really appreciated. And you can reach me at this email address. Thank you. I heard this was interesting. Sorry if I I would love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you.
We have a bit, because I have a little bit of trouble hearing composition from the audience, so I'm not sure if I'll be able to answer questions over the Zoom call, but I would love to make questions of mine via Adrian. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Susanna. Okay. Now we have a look at one Olivia Chandler, another interesting topic from eco-utopia to reality.
Questions? No questions for this one?
She said you can send via email. But, Susanna, are you there? I thought she. Yes. Okay. I misunderstood. Okay.
Maybe if we use the microphone.
I think it's
She hears.
She can hear the audience, but if somebody repeats the question, then she'll be able to.
Okay. Can you come over a little bit? Okay, I will repeat the question.
It's going to be quick.
What's the question?
I think like building food forest is a matter of survival for all of us, like in the era of climate collapse. So for people who don't have any expertise, how quick can this be replicated? How quickly, and what kind of expertise do we need to build in order to make things like this happen?
Okay, Susanna, what sort of preparation we need to form a food forest? What we need, how long it takes to mature, to get benefit out of our food forest? Yeah, this is the question.
And what's
there is a lot of sort of experimental literature, and then not published in academic journals necessarily, but just findings that have come from like individual people that have decided to set something up on their own sort of land, and so there is a lot of that out there, but not necessarily in scientific journals. What you have to keep in mind is that it does take a long time to set it up. It requires a lot of knowledge about the complementarity of certain species, and so depending on what climate you're in, what kind of soil you're working with, what sort of terrain you're working with, that will inform what kind of species you choose. And then, certain basis, the kind of soil species that you choose will then inform what other species will go well together with them. I don't have the sort of specific knowledge about, which specific species are complementary to each other and which ones are suited to specific terrain. I also don't have time to summarize all of it. But you have to, like I said, keep in mind the specificity of the ecosystem that you're working with. And so in terms of urban settings there are specific challenges because a lot of the time soils in which crops and other plants are going to be growing are contaminated with heavy metals, for example. There is also in many cases a lot of air pollution, which can impact what kind of fruit or other vegetation you can grow. But the thing is that once you set up the garden or the food forest, it requires very little maintenance when it reaches maturity. And so, a lot of the current projects that exist right now are very basic. And so we have very, very few examples of truly mature food forest systems. It's estimated that they can take 25, 50 years to reach full maturity. But once they do, they require very little upkeep because they're able to recycle nutrients internally, so they don't really require fertilizer. and the different species, if they are picked correctly, with regards to complementarity, they can, the symptoms self-regulate, and it doesn't require pesticide, for example, because if you choose the right species, they can, protect the others around them from the effects of pests and disease and so on. But like I said, the setup of it can be quite labor intensive, and that's one of the barriers to instituting them.
Thank you. It was quite comprehensive explanation. Okay, one more question.
So yes, thank you very much for the presentation. I think it's clear the impact that it has on climate, environment, and food sovereignty, but I also think that there's a really important impact on the community engagement. So that's a very good example, same as urban gardens to local community engagement, but also developing participatory schemes among different stakeholders, like the local community, with the municipality, and so on. So my question is if there has been part of this paper or the whole survey that addresses these questions of how the community can also get engaged, and if there could be any participatory schemes.
Participatory period, including all stakeholders. For example, if we got a site through the municipality, how a project can be more inclusive to the community as a whole in the local area.
Yeah, so that the community is actively involved in the development.
Yeah, how we can encourage community to actively involve to the food forest. Is it clear enough, Susanna?
Yes, I think so. So, I guess a lot of it heavily depends on where the food forest is set up, because not all communities will, draw the same benefits from it, and also not, all urban communities have the same needs and priorities. So, for example, some of the studies I checked in the paper have found that, for example, in more affluent areas, for example, one of the priorities that they have is not really food sovereignty, but on the contrary, they might have issues with something like a food forest system being set up in their vicinity, because they have a preference for green spaces that are very, manageable and quite well maintained, whereas food forests look a little bit, quite messy. And so it really depends on choosing the correct placement, making sure that such a scheme is instituted in the community that would most benefit from it. And like I said, a lot of the current already existing projects like this focus a lot on education, and especially sort of participation activities and educational activities for children and forest schools. And so having an outreach program and areas in the food forest that are geared specifically towards education and including elements which are, especially seizing or areas that can be, or designing the food forest in such a way that there is a way for people to, so it's not just sort of pragmatic and materially useful, but also a pleasant space to spend time in, and a space that has recreational potential. Just really maximizing all the different facets of the ecosystem that has most different different communities.
Okay, thank you, Susanna. Again, another. Okay. Now we can move to utopia, to reality.
Do you want me to close the Zoom?
Of course, ecology is like for me. Olivia, can you introduce yourself a little bit, your background? Sorry.
Awesome. You start timers. Okay. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. I know it's been a long day and weekend, but this is last presentation. So my name is Olivia. I am a graduate student at the University of Utah. I study environmental humanities. And this project is kind of a couple years of work that is branched into a few different things, but always comes back to my interest and commitment to a liberatory praxis and the different ways that that can manifest in our different processes to reach a communalist and liberatory society. So my research question here is, how is modern communalism practiced in intentional communities? What lessons can we learn from them to help build a praxis of social ecology? So a little background on communalism. I think we've had some really good background this weekend. But how I understand it is that it is the proposed social or societal and political structure of Bookchin's social ecology, mostly articulated through libertarian municipalism. So there's a decentralized confederation of municipalities that come together with different scales of assemblies, and they practice direct democracy and have largely freedom, principles of freedom, equality, and ecological balance. And I have this quote from Bookchin that I think really sums up this image of communalism very well and the specific eco-communities within his proposed structure. So Bookchin wrote, "Cities are to be decentralized and new eco-communities are to be established. These eco-communities are to be scaled to human dimensions. No bureaucratic, manipulative, centralized administration here, but a voluntaristic system in which the economy, society, and ecology of an area are administered by the community as a whole. And the distribution of the means of life is determined by need rather than by labor, profit, or accumulation." So next, to define what I mean by intentional communities. So they're broadly defined as communities that are set apart from mainstream society in order to address a specific issue or usually a set of issues. Tim Miller, who's a scholar of intentional communities, mostly in the US context, has 4 principles by which we can identify these communities. And he says that they need to be together on the basis of a shared purpose, live closely together on a property, have an economic commonality, such as income, and have at least 5 adult members. So I think familiar to some folks, we can think about eco-villages as a type of intentional community, co-housing, and communes. And the context in which I'm really focusing on here is the intentional communities that arose specifically in the US in the 1970s counterculture movement. So that counterculture movement was inspired largely by environmentalist movements, back to the land, feminist and sex positive movements, anti-war, anti-nuclear, civil rights movements, and largely we can just think of a hippie era. Today, you can find a lot of intentional communities, both through the Foundation for Intentional Communities, which is like an online community or directory that also serves educational purposes. And then more specifically, there's the Federation of Egalitarian Communities, the FEC, which is the structure and kind of the federation model that I am focusing on. So, a couple of years ago, I was able to travel to the East Wind Intentional Community. It is in rural Missouri in like the Midwest Southern United States. And I conducted 2 weeks of ethnographic work there. And while I was there, I was not focusing on social ecology, but I was focusing on the role of capitalism within their community and how it mediates the relationships and how they subvert capitalism. And what I found there ended up kind of inspiring years of research that I've been applying to different fields, including this one. So a little background on Eastwind. It is 1,200 acres. A lot of it is a nature preserve, and only about 345 acres of it have infrastructure or farming on it. So it's mostly undeveloped land, and it's very far from the closest. It is near a town, but it's a very, very rural, like separatist town in Missouri, in the Ozarks community. There are 70 people there. It was founded in the 1970s countercultural period, so it is one of the longer standing communes, or one of the longest standing like hippie communities in the U.S. At Eastwind, between these 70 people, they are all expected to work about 35 hours of work a week. But this work is very flexible. It is self-run, so they choose what work they are going to do, whether that's working on the farms or childcare or cooking or building maintenance. But all of the work is done within the intentional community, so everybody only works in the community. And the work is adjusted for things like ability, age, retirement, etc. And that's in an effort to uphold their value of egalitarianism. And part of that is giving labor credit for things that are not normally credited as valuable labor in mainstream society. So that's like childcare, education, taking care of oneself when they're sick or have, needs that aren't being met. And one of the things that really stuck with me is they get labor credit for participating in their governing process. And so their governing process is very extensive. They're direct democracy with self-governance and consensus models. And so they have no centralized leader, but they have basically an assembly of randomly picked members every year that rotates. But all decisions have to be made with the majority of the community in consensus. And so it's a very arduous and at times very tense process, but they're very focused on upholding autonomy and egalitarianism. Lastly, they are focused on closing their ecological loops. They're really very interested in a very regenerative and sustainable lifestyle. So whether that there's an extensive composting system, they're not entirely self-sufficient with food, but they're continuously working on it. And just by virtue of they share all of their housing, they collectively own 3 or 4 cars as a community. There's not much traveling, and there's very little consumption. So you can imagine that the consumption and carbon footprint and waste output of a community like this is exceptionally small. Okay, so, and that's a cool map. So like to do a bit of theory building, thinking about what can we learn from intentional communities, specifically thinking about income sharing and egalitarian communities like Eastwind. Oh, and I missed a really important point. Huge principle is income sharing, and they do this by not only are they all working in the community, but the community runs a nut butter business on its land. They have a factory that they are the only ones that staff. They generate several $1 million a year, and that is all put back towards funding their community. And then they're all given discretionary funding every month. That is, when I was there a couple of years ago, it was $150 a month. That is not a lot of money, but all of their food, healthcare, and necessities and housing are covered. So that's for things like beer or a cell phone bill. So that's a really integral part of how they're able to operate, and we'll come back to that. Okay, so theory building and discussion, thinking about Bookchin's communalism and then how this very intentional eco-community operates. I have a couple of points or themes that I want to draw out. First, there's the Confederation network structure, utopian projects, prefigurative politics, and the limitations of lifestyle. So first, looking at the Confederation network structure. So the Federation of Egalitarian has 4 member communities, all within the United States, and then they have 6 allied communities, but they're not core to the assembly. And so these member communities, which includes Eastwind, has shared principles of holding land and labor in common, meeting all members' needs, practicing nonviolence, using consensus or direct vote decision-making methods, egalitarianism, ecological sustainability, and developing group communication and participation. They host annual assemblies where they send delegates from each community to gather and discuss and deliberate about issues that are affecting their communities directly. And one of the important things to note here is that these are delegates and they're not representatives, so they cannot unilaterally make a decision for their community, but they're rather points, then they go back to their community, they deliberate, have decisions made within community, and communicate those, which is very similar to how I understood Bookchin's idea of a delegate. And I guess it's also through the FEC that they're able to do their own healthcare system. They're able to provide small grants, which is kind of a form of mutual aid for communities to help each other out when they're in need. And there is a labor exchange program, so that it's one of their attempts to minimize the isolation that community members feel. And so they're able to leave community, go to another intentional community, work there, live there for a while, gain ideas and inspiration, and then come back when they're ready. So overall, the FEC is, although it's a very small scale, it's around voluntary cooperation, accountability, and collaboration between these independent communities. Next theme, or link between social ecology and intentional communities, is that they are both utopian projects. And I think we can understand utopianism as this ever-present wishfulness towards the life we desire translated into action. But what's been really important for me in this process of engaging with these kinds of communities is understanding that utopianism is not perfectionism. And it's when we try to equate it to perfectionism that we kind of undermine their very projects. And it's how, especially in popular media, intentional communities are really labeled as like ironic failures because they're expected to be perfect because they're in this utopian lineage. So we're pushing back against that idea of perfectionism in these projects. Both in social ecology and communalism and then intentional communities, we can understand them as these constantly evolving and reflexive processes that are less focused on outcome and more focused on process and how we are reaching our outcome. And in that, they have this dialecticism where they're really focusing on relationality and evolution rather than the ends. This also reflects a potentiality of humanity to evolve and change, which again is kind of integral to social ecology principles. Lastly, I just wanted to point out I was kind of using this method of utopian extrapolation, which is identifying these radical principles at work in these projects and then using them to help revise our theories. And I think, again, that says something about the idea of not rejecting a project as useful just because it isn't perfect, but rather thinking what principles are at work here and what can we learn from these. Oh boy. Okay, prefigurative politics, my next theme. This is an activist praxis that I think many are familiar with, and it's basically the idea that the ends or the means to which we reach an end should be as aligned as possible, or the process should be reflected in the outcome and vice versa. And in prefigurative politics, there's also this rejection that the personal and the political is on this binary. So we can also think about like lifestyle and direct action sometimes are on this binary as well. And prefigurative politics is a window into which we can understand how those two are related. Another thing about prefigurative politics that I think is really relevant here, both to social ecology and to intentional communities, is that prefigurative politics as a theory and as a practice recognizes that there are limitations inherent to it, and that when you are trying to build a new world actively while it's still entrenched in, let's say, a capitalist system, you're going to come up against tensions, and that's inevitable, and it actually can signal that you are doing something that is so against the norm that there is resistance. So these tensions are something that or even contradictions are something to learn from rather than these kinds of failures. And we see that in Eastwind. They run a for-profit nut butter business, which a lot of people point to as a contradiction. I say it's not a contradiction, but one of their strategic ways to exist in order to kind of manifest all of their non-capitalist relationships between each other. Okay. Lastly, looking at the limitations of lifestyle, and this is more of my critique of where I think social ecology or communalism really diverges from intentional communities. And the biggest contrast here is that intentional communities in the United States and this federation, there is no political program, there is no growth or expansion, and they're not building dual power or challenging the state, which Bookchin clearly outlines is very essential to the revolutionary project. And one of Bookchin's rants that I kind of appreciate is his takedown of lifestyle anarchism, which is really a focus on upholding individual autonomy rather than understanding that freedom is a collective pursuit and it needs to be institutionalized into forms of governance. And there's a lot of analysis out there that kind of calls intentional communities these lifestyle anarchists. That's its own debate. I wouldn't say that they are 100% lifestyle anarchists. A lot of them are actually retired activists that are kind of stepping away either out of being burned out or frustration or a generational gap. But there's certainly this focus, almost a myopic focus on this collective lifestyle or individual lifestyle that does not necessarily fit this larger political program. I guess I'll conclude now, yeah? Okay, so in conclusion, intentional communities signal this importance of prefigurative politics in communal organizing and living, although their revolutionary limits are apparent. Intentional communities may not be what transforms society towards this communalist future, but they do offer very valuable lessons for practitioners of social ecology about the role of lifestyle and prefigurative politics in community cohesion, and they demonstrate the human potentiality for life beyond the status quo. Let us vote up. Yeah. Last question.
Theory into practice. Lots of questions we are with. So, embodied the utopia into practice. You should wait. Another person to ask? Yes, please.
Thank you very much. This was very interesting presentation. I have a question about the communities that are living in this you mentioned that they manage work exclusively inside within the community, right? So did this really happen and did they completely avoid working outside to
Yeah, they do. And the only way that they're able to do that is through that they run a business. So they actively like sell their nut butter. They also make rope sandals. That used to be a big one. And their sister community of Twin Oaks in Virginia, which is another one of the ones from the 1970s, they run a tofu factory. And so they sell tofu. So that's how they're able to generate enough revenue in order to be self-sustaining. And no one's actually allowed to like make money outside of it. They used to even have a system where if you were getting like monthly stipends of like social security or other things coming in, those were expected to be pooled. And I've heard that that is not actually kind of how it goes anymore. It more goes into savings, and you're expected to not dip into your savings while you're living there because it kind of violates this idea of egalitarianism.
Yes, please.
Well, education. I have a question. Children are educated in ordinary school, are educated in the community. What about education?
They actually, so there are a couple of children there, but not many. They said there used to be quite a bit more, but families usually leave by the time children are like need more socializing because they're just, it doesn't feel like there's enough. So when I was there were mostly like toddlers that were more in a daycare, but they are close enough to the town to go to school there. And my understanding is that the ones that are of school age do go to the public school and aren't like, it's not necessarily a homeschooling situation.
You in your analysis you said that you noticed that many of the intentional communities don't have the kind of a more I don't remember the word you said, the political something. I think we would call it like the vision focus or the liberatory orientation. I'm intending to co-found a community that would have that. And so I'm curious in your imagination, if you think of an intentional community that does have that kind of orientation, would you have a different opinion about intentional communities helping to bring communalism to the world?
Yeah, I struggle with that a lot. And it's kind of the point of like what I've been thinking about a lot, because I think what I find is that there's a point where the focus on lifestyle or prefiguring like the future that you want, I think is so important in community cohesion and upholding your values and not recreating the very hierarchies that you're seeking to dismantle. But if there's such an internal focus, you kind of get lost in actually being part of the movement. And I think part of the intentional communities in this confederation are very rural, and they've kind of like carved space out of mainstream society. And so they're, in some ways, they're hidden. And they don't have people kind of coming in and out of them very rapidly. And so rather than seeking to like pursue collective liberation with the most oppressed, in some ways they're leaving them behind. Or the most oppressed have to find them as a community and join them, and then they will, you know, have the equal resources and opportunities and all of these things, but they're not actively like trying to create a like mass solidarity movement, because they're really focused on like how do these 70 people feel and how are we doing as a community. So I think I'm interested in a potential future project and looking at like urban intentional communities. So it's usually like co-housing or eco-villages that are more integrated into mainstream, and kind of how they balance the prefiguring with their like political activity. Yeah.
You have
Okay. You should then. You. I just want to suggest to you a line of research. I don't know if it's still happening now with all the war and everything, but there's quite a movement of small communes in Israel that are doing exactly this, where at least they were, trying to both work on how they live and also engage in social projects in where they are and choosing locations based on that. So if you're interested, I can connect you with that.
Okay.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh wow. Secondly, I think. I was just wondering also like if you look into because like the accessibility of this for other kind of identities, like what I've seen seemed quite homogenous in a certain way. Did you think, or is it something that you're going to include in your projects?
Yeah, in kind of like past versions of this project, that was a bit of a focus. It is in East Wind, mostly white, not entirely, but mostly. They're pretty gender diverse and diverse in like ability as well, but racially very homogenous. And I had a lot of conversations with some of the communards about that, and they were very open to talking about it. And part of it, I mean, there's some theorizing about like they're in a very heavily red Midwest conservative state that's a very hostile environment. So it's simply like, regardless of how appealing or safe like East Wind might be, they're still like immersed in a really hostile place. So part of it could be location. Another part is like, this does have a lot of roots in the Back to the Land movement, which is very white middle class, part of like the more white environmentalist movement. So part of it is like the roots, and I think part of it is location. And I do know that there are other communities, I think especially ones that are more urban, or mixed between like urban and rural, are dealing, I think, much more comprehensively and better with the idea of like having a heterogeneous and diverse makeup.
Okay, thank you guys.
5 minutes break, because we have another really interesting topic: war and how food production is possible under a difficult situation like Ukraine. We are starting
Half an hour.
half an hour. Really? Oh, okay, yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Until 7 at least.
Yeah.
Until
So
6. Sorry.
we are proposing to have a
Maybe
six.
six.
Okay, we're proposing to have a picture together. So if you want, we can all go out outside in the patio, take a nice picture, discuss, and come back in half an hour. No?
So half an hour means we are starting at 6.
Also, I want to say if someone has ideas, criticisms, or wants to share perspectives on the topic that I was talking, please come and we'll discuss it.
I was I wanted to ask so many questions. Thanks. I was trying to ask for something. I was wondering what is the actually to the advisor like I wonder what's the connection in there to culture between the see not the means yes. Because publicly in Europe, I think that it's things like financial make communities use why the one. She see there's a license.
Maybe I will to yeah, this is the way. But the example, the whole activity is profit. Yes, you're gone. Yeah, no, the problems, but actually, they could come and comes from out of nowhere. Is that the internal was here. This is so much. It's all now because of that really important. I think that not things different. Yeah, they move very often. They are animals. The places that they might be saying a lot of prayer. And no one they know that they're quite very poor. So you can explain. Nice, right? Very, very dangerous people. It makes the game. Look at that. How you can okay. Understand now? Yeah, it's a saying. It's correct that. It's a given. They say, I know what you mean, but it's another plan. They connect it down from there sometimes. Yeah. So, yeah. We feel it's here, guys. We know that together we have same machine because now it's difficult to take the everybody. The majority of the family. So much like getting yeah. And they take money from the working. They say that we have 1,000 seats, but we can't pay. And they move it into different. Yeah. Specific kind of complexion. It's a okay, it's like that.
Sorry, can we go out for the picture? So all together as presenters and participants. Who has a camera?
What camera? I don't. I have a shitty phone, so it's something.
Me too. So someone else.
Okay. That's good phone. Right? If they attend, I have a shitty. No, I have it.
I agree.
Yes.